You know, you could have the perfectly pristine, beautifully smooth cartilage of a 20-year-old elite athlete and still wake up today absolutely unable to bend your knees without groaning.
Oh, yeah. It's a brutal reality for so many people, and it really forces us to completely reevaluate a biological system that we honestly thought we had figured out back in the 1990s.
Right, which is exactly why we're here. Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are looking at a really fascinating 2026 article, and it's titled, Why Biodynamics is Selling Out, The Lubrication Revolution in Joint Health 2026.
It's a great read, really exposes this decades-long misunderstanding about musculoskeletal health that most of us are honestly still falling for.
Yeah, we basically spent half a century treating our joints like simple blocks of wood that just, wear down over time.
Exactly. Completely ignoring the complex fluid dynamics that actually allow them to function.
And if you're listening to this, you have almost certainly dealt with that specific, localized mechanical failure at some point. You try to get out of bed, or maybe stand up after a long flight, and there's this stiffness that practically vibrates through your bones.
Yeah, it feels like a structural failure,
Yeah.
which is why our medical intuition always led us to look at the structure itself. The
Yeah.
bones, the ligaments, the cartilage.
Right, the hardware. Whether you're someone who spent years pounding the pavement, running marathons, or you're just, simply trying to navigate your 30s, 40s, or beyond without feeling locked up, that reduced flexibility is just maddening.
It really is.
So our mission today is to tackle that structural bias. We're going to explore why the traditional vice, that mandate to just fix your cartilage, is being rapidly replaced by a totally different biochemical approach.
And we're going to look at biodynamics joint genesis, not as a miracle cure, but, as a compelling case study of how the supplement industry is pivoting to meet this new scientific reality in 2026.
Okay, so to understand the pivot, we really have to look at the historical context of this cartilage-only era. Like, why were we so obsessed with it?
Well, the medical field has historically operated on a very Cartesian mechanistic view of the body.
Yeah.
You look at an X-ray or an MRI, and what do you actually see?
Right, you just see the stark white of the bone.
Exactly. The bone and the distinct empty space where the cartilage sits. Because cartilage loss is highly visible on our diagnostic imaging, it just became the singular culprit for joint discomfort.
Because if we can see the wear and tear on the cartilage, the immediate assumption is, well, rebuilding the cartilage solves the problem.
That was the golden rule. It drove an entire era of musculoskeletal interventions. If a patient came in with stiff shoulders or creaky hips, the entire conversation just started and ended with structural reinforcement.
Which spawned an absolute empire of specific ingredients. Anyone who is paid even passing attention to athletic recovery or aging knows the familiar roster, right?
Oh, absolutely. Glucosamine, chondroitin, MSM.
Collagen.
Yeah, collagen. Maybe a few herbal extracts thrown in for good measure.
But I have to challenge that historical approach because it presents this massive, glaring statistical contradiction.
It does.
Millions of adults have been dutifully swallowing glucosamine pills and stirring collagen powder into their morning coffee for, over 2 decades now?
Easily 2 decades.
So if that Cartesian model was correct and targeting the cartilage was the definitive answer, why are those exact same millions of adults still dealing with the exact same morning stiffness or that lingering discomfort after just a simple hike?
And that glaring failure rate is what finally forced researchers to look beyond the MRI. The scientific community really had to confront a humbling reality. Cartilage is just one piece of an incredibly sophisticated joint ecosystem.
Ecosystem, right.
Yeah, we were so hyper-focused on the building blocks, but we were completely neglecting the biological environment those blocks actually live in.
I want to dive into the physics of that biological environment because the mechanics here are far more fascinating than just bones rubbing together.
Yeah.
We can skip past the basic anatomy. Everyone listening knows what ligaments and tendons are doing to stabilize a joint. The real magic happens inside the synovial membrane.
The synovial fluid, yeah, this is where the paradigm completely shifts. The synovial fluid is this complex biological marvel that encapsulates the entire joint.
It's not just a passive pool of water in there.
Not at all. It is a highly active, non-Newtonian fluid.
Okay, let's expand on that because non-Newtonian fluid dynamics are wild. The source compares it to engine oil, right?
Yeah, the engine analogy is perfect. Think of a well-maintained car engine. You can have perfectly built brand new parts like healthy cartilage, but without oil, Those parts are going to create friction and just grind themselves to dust.
Because our joints are designed to glide, not grind.
Exactly. And the non-Newtonian part means the fluid actually changes its viscosity depending on the mechanical stress you put on it.
Wait, really? It changes its own thickness?
Yeah. When you're sitting still or moving slowly, the synovial fluid is highly viscous. It's thick, and it holds the joint surfaces apart. But the moment you start running, when the joint is subjected to rapid, high shear forces, the fluid's viscosity decreases.
Oh, wow. So it thins out.
It thins out instantaneously to reduce drag and allow for a rapid, smooth glide. But its elastic properties simultaneously increase to act as a shock absorber.
So it instinctively knows when to act like a thick cushion and when to act like a slick oil. That's incredible.
It is. And beyond the physics, it's the sole life support system for the cartilage itself. Because cartilage is a vascular.
Meaning no blood vessels, right?
Right. It does not have its own blood supply to deliver oxygen or clear out metabolic waste. It relies entirely on the synovial fluid to bathe it in nutrients.
Okay, but a fluid with those kinds of shape-shifting, shock-absorbing properties requires a very specific chemical makeup, because water alone would just splash out of the way under pressure. What is the active agent giving synovial fluid that structural integrity?
The primary active agent, the VIP component of this entire system, is a massive molecule called hyaluronan. You'll frequently hear it referred to as hyaluronic acid.
Right, people probably know that from skincare.
Exactly. But inside the joint, it's a type of glycosaminoglycan.
So how does that specific molecule manipulate the water in the joint?
Well, think of hyaluronan as a massive, densely coiled biological polymer. Its chemical structure is incredibly hydrophilic.
Meaning it naturally attracts water.
Attracts and binds to it, yeah. In fact, hyaluronan can hold up to 1,000 times its own weight in water.
I want to use an analogy here to visualize this mechanism, because it's not just floating in the water, it is physically trapping it.
Go for it.
So think about the silica gel you find inside a disposable baby diaper. Before it gets wet, it's just a light powder. But the moment fluid hits it, that powder expands into a thick, dense, spongy gel that absolutely refuses to let the water escape, even when the baby sits on it.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it, honestly.
Right, so hyaluronan is acting like that ultra-absorbent polymer network inside the joint capsule. It traps the water, creating this hydrostatic pressure matrix that physically prevents the bones from crashing into each other.
It creates a pressurized cushion. The hyaluronan molecules entangle with one another, forming this viscous gel-like network. And that network is what gives the synovial fluid its thickness and its ability to absorb a sudden impact.
So when you jump off a step, it's the hyaluronan water matrix that's absorbing that kinetic energy, not just your cartilage.
Precisely.
Okay, so if the body manufactures this superpolymer naturally to maintain that pressurized cushion, what is the biological trigger that causes the system to fail? Like, why does the fluid stop protecting the joint for so many of us?
The failure basically cascades from natural cellular aging. The hyaluronan in your joints is produced by specialized cells in the synovial membrane called synoviocytes.
Okay, synoviocytes.
Right. And as adults age, these synoviocytes undergo cellular senescence. They essentially become sluggish, zombie-like cells.
Oh, man. Zombie cells.
Yeah, the biological factory doesn't shut down completely, but its output drops drastically.
So they just stop manufacturing the polymer at the volume we need.
Volume decreases, yes. But the quality of the polymer also changes. Older synoviocytes tend to produce lower molecular weight hyaluronan.
Which means what, practically?
It means it doesn't entangle or hold water nearly as effectively as the massive high molecular weight chains that are produced in our youth. Furthermore, as we age, microvascular circulation to the joint capsule naturally decreases. So the factory is getting fewer raw materials to work with in the first place.
Which brings us back to the realization from the source material that completely upends the traditional medical model. The factory slows down, the hyaluronan levels plummet, and the fluid loses its thickness.
Exactly.
So you can have a joint where the cartilage is structurally flawless, but because the biological environment has dried up, the joint still grinds, clicks, and causes tremendous discomfort.
The structure is intact, but the ecosystem is failing.
I love that framing. Let's use a physical analogy from the source to make this crystal clear for the listener. Imagine two doors. One has incredibly sturdy, brand new hinges, but absolutely no lubricant. The other has older hinges, but they are properly lubricated.
Which one opens smoothly?
Right. The lubricated one. It's not just about the structure, it's about the environment. Or think of a massive, high-end backyard slip and slide.
Oh, I see where you're going with this.
Yeah, the plastic mat itself is your cartilage. It is thick, tear-resistant, and brand new. But if you turn the garden hose off, if there is no water flowing over that plastic, it doesn't matter how premium the material is.
If you dive onto it, you're going to get brutal friction burns.
Exactly. The friction isn't caused by a defective mat, it's caused by a dry environment.
The hyaluronan is the hose. When production drops, the water is effectively turned off, and the resulting friction causes microtraumas in the joint, which then triggers an inflammatory response.
Which leads to the stiffness and swelling that people experience every morning.
Precisely. And this shift in understanding from structural repair to environmental hydration is why the article identifies 2026 as the era of the lubrication revolution.
Because the scientific community hasn't decided that cartilage is irrelevant. They've simply realized that you cannot maintain healthy cartilage in a dehydrated environment.
Right. The fundamental questions driving the research have pivoted. Healthcare professionals are no longer solely asking, how do we rebuild this worn-down cartilage?
They're stepping back.
They're stepping back and asking, how do we restore the rheological properties of the synovial fluid to prevent the cartilage from wearing down in the first place? How do we keep joints moving smoothly to begin with?
Which brings us to how the consumer market is actually reacting to this data right now. The article uses BIODYNAMIX joint genesis as the primary case study for this whole pivot.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating reflection of where applied nutritional science is right now.
Because it's currently selling out, right? And the source points out it's because it completely abandons that 1990s structural philosophy.
It does. Instead of trying to throw isolated structural building blocks at the joint like just another collagen pill, its formulation is designed entirely around supporting hyaluronan levels and targeting that root fluid environment.
So why is it flying off the shelves specifically in 2026? The source unpacks 4 specific reasons driving this trend, and I want to run through them. First, as we just said, it focuses on the internal environment where movement actually occurs, not just structural support.
Right, which moves us away from the kitchen sink approach of the past, where companies would just bundle every known joint compound into one massive pill.
Right. The second reason is that it reflects emerging research from leading U.S. institutions on joint lubrication. But I'm curious, if the biomechanics of hyaluronan have been understood by researchers for a while, why is it only now, in 2026, that the consumer market is finally catching on?
Well, the delay is largely due to how medical science translates to public awareness. For decades, the messaging around aging was inherently fatalistic. It was just accepted that joints simply wear out, like brake pads on a car.
Right, nothing you can do about it.
Exactly. But recently, this emerging research from U.S. institutions has become much more accessible to the public. They've published extensive data specifically isolating hyaluronan breakdown as a primary driver of joint discomfort, totally independent of cartilage wear.
So the data finally broke through the noise. Which leads into the third reason the article highlights. It appeals to modern consumers who want to support natural body functions rather than isolating a single joint component.
Yeah, there's been a shift in consumer sophistication. People today have a much firmer grasp on systems biology. They don't view their bodies as a collection of isolated mechanical parts anymore.
They see the big picture.
That holistic understanding changes purchasing behavior. Modern consumers realize that isolating a single structural component often fails because it ignores the biological context. They are actively seeking interventions that support natural physiological functions. Replenishing hyaluronan to restore the body's own cushioning fluid just makes intuitive sense to a biologically literate consumer.
That makes total sense.
Yeah.
And the fourth reason driving this is huge. It aligns with preventative wellness. We are seeing a massive rise in this. Adults are not waiting until they are 65 and facing a total mobility crisis to start thinking about joint hydration.
No, they're using this science in their 30s and 40s as prehab.
Prehab, I love that word.
Proactive maintenance is the hallmark of the lubrication revolution. If you understand that cellular senescence begins slowly turning down the hyaluronan factory decades before you feel severe limitations, the logical response is to support that system early.
You preserve the glide before the grinding ever has a chance to damage the cartilage.
Exactly.
Okay, but I think we need to initiate a severe reality check here for the listener. Because whenever a new scientific paradigm hits the mainstream, whether it's gut microbiomes, neuroplasticity, or in this case, joint lubrication, there is always an immediate temptation to view the new intervention as a silver bullet.
Always.
But let's be real, no supplement, regardless of how elegantly it targets hyaluronan, gives you permission to ignore human physiology, right?
Not at all. And any literature claiming otherwise is ignoring basic biomechanics. Biodynamics, or any intervention focused on synovial fluid, is fundamentally a biochemical tool. But that tool is utterly useless if it is not supported by mechanical action and a systemic foundation of health.
Walk me through the mechanics of that. If I take a hyaluronan supporting supplement, but I sit at a desk for 14 hours a day, why does the joint still fail?
Because of how the fluid actually works its way into the tissue. Remember earlier when we discussed that cartilage is a vascular?
Right, no blood pump.
It doesn't have a pump sending blood to it. It relies entirely on mechanical loading to survive. When you walk, the physical compression of your body weight squeezes the cartilage like a sponge, pushing old waste fluid out.
Yeah.
And when you lift your foot, the pressure is released, and the cartilage sucks in the fresh, nutrient-rich, hyaluronan-dense synovial fluid.
Oh, wow. So the movement itself is the pump.
Precisely. If you are sedentary, that pumping action never happens. The fluid just stagnates. You can have the most robust hyaluronan levels in the world, but if you do not engage in regular low-impact exercise to physically force that fluid into the cartilage matrix, the tissue will still starve.
Which means maintaining baseline systemic health is entirely non-negotiable. The source outlines the foundational lifestyle choices, and they are unapologetically basic. First, you have to maintain adequate systemic hydration.
Yes.
Because if hyaluronan's entire mechanism of action is binding to water molecules, operating in a state of chronic dehydration, chemically sabotages the whole process. Right.
Absolutely. You also have to consider the load you are placing on the system. Maintaining a healthy body weight is critical because every extra pound of static weight exponentially increases the shear force placed on the synovial fluid during movement.
That makes sense. And strength training too, right?
Yes, strength training is required to build the muscular architecture that stabilizes the joint capsule itself. The fluid absorbs the shock, but the muscles dictate the alignment.
Right. And finally, eating a balanced diet and getting restorative sleep, because you have to allow those synoviocytes time to actually manufacture the polymers. I think the takeaway here is that you just cannot biohack your way out of a sedentary, dehydrated lifestyle.
You really can't, and that leads to a critical medical disclaimer that we must emphasize directly to the listener.
Yes, absolutely.
The science of synovial fluid is fascinating, but your individual biomechanical reality is entirely unique. Every person's needs are different based on age, activity level, and medical history.
Exactly. The density of your cartilage, your history of physical trauma, your current cellular health, these are highly individualized variables.
So if you are experiencing chronic joint limitations, or if you are considering introducing any new supplement into your regimen, especially if you have existing health conditions or take pharmaceuticals, you must consult a qualified healthcare professional.
Do not attempt to self-diagnose based on a discussion of fluid dynamics.
Right. Medical professionals have the diagnostic tools to understand the complete picture of your musculoskeletal health. A targeted discussion with them is always the required first step.
Okay, so as we wrap up and synthesize everything we've covered today, we are looking at a profound evolution in how we manage human movement. We have finally graduated from the outdated Cartesian view, where we treated our joints like dry and mechanical hinges that simply needed their parts replaced.
We've moved into the lubrication revolution.
Yes, characterized by a deep appreciation for the fluid dynamics of the synovial capsule, the hydrophilic power of hyaluronan, and a consumer market that is actively seeking to support these internal ecosystems through products like BIODYNAMIX.
It's a massive shift from structural obsession to environmental optimization. We are finally respecting the fluid that makes the movement possible.
Which brings me to a final thought I want you, the listener, to ponder after you finish this deep dive. Think about how long it took us to realize that the invisible fluid was just as important as the highly visible bone. We spent decades fixated on the hard structures, entirely missing the ecosystem that sustained them.
It's pretty wild to think about.
So if we got it that wrong about our joints, by treating them like static mechanical structures that just wear down, instead of dynamic fluid environments that need hydration, where else in the human body are we making the exact same mistake right now?
Oh, that makes you question our approach to almost every major biological system.
Right. Consider the brain. For decades, we focused entirely on the physical neurons, the gray matter, the synapses. Only recently have we begun to understand the glymphatic system, the literal fluid ecosystem that washes through the brain while we sleep, clearing out metabolic waste. Or look at the gut. We spend centuries treating digestion as just a mechanical and chemical breakdown of food, completely ignoring the microscopic ecosystem of the microbiome that actually dictates our immune response and neurochemistry.
We are constantly seduced by the physical structures we can see on a scan.
Right. While entirely ignoring the vital fluid ecosystems that actually keep us alive. Perhaps it is time we stop looking so hard at the walls of the house and start paying much closer attention to the atmosphere inside the rooms. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the lubrication revolution. Keep moving, stay curious, and we will see you next time.